So as I mentioned before on other props, you do want to avoid having more than four-sided mesh. So you can try to use the connect tool. That's one issue, but I think this thing, it crashed when we tried to unwrap it. So the first best thing to do is go into mesh cleanup. Essentially, these are the defaults I like, which is lamina faces. So this is when you have edges sharing, or faces sharing all edges. So it's almost literally like a bunch of edges stacked on top of each other in a polygon with no surface area. Non-manifold geometry is, like I said, when you've got one edge that actually has three polygons sticking out of it, which is technically should be incorrect, but the software allows you to do. Edges with zero length, which is again another problem. Faces with zero geometry area. So again, it'll literally try to find those areas and just like weld them or collapse them down or basically delete them. And then invalid components. What that is, I don't know, but it's basically something that's screwing with the mathematics behind the scenes. I never check this on, especially when I haven't done UVs, because this will literally delete polygons that have no UV areas in them. So if you're trying to get to UVs, you don't want to turn this on because it could potentially collapse your mesh down to like next to nothing or just a bunch of random triangles. So usually it's good to, a mesh that may be crashing your scene or causing a problem, you can go through cleanup. In this case, it looks like it's selecting a polygon or telling me maybe there's a problem with this polygon. It seems okay. If I pull this out, that seems all right. You may also want to delete your history because, again, like I said, history can cause a lot of baggage and a lot of delay or pain in your scene. Again, I also like to make sure I do not have mesh that is basically just kind of sitting there with multi-sided mesh. So you can either go in and select particular faces that might be a problem and go to triangulate or quadrangulate, but I find quadrangulate doesn't work as well. For me, I usually prefer to actually do it by hand. I won't bore you to death with that, but I also see there's a bit of a smooth shading issue, which again, I made dock marks for. So you can actually go into mesh display, soften harden edges, and it should fix the issue. In this case, I actually think you might have a weird poly issue because you actually, again, have like a 6 or 7-sided mesh. So what is actually happening is this polygon or these vertices are actually not lying flat. To flatten them out, you can try to scale them, but they're going to scale kind of off angle. So there's a little trick to this. If you double click on your scale tool, set it to component, so it'll look at the average angle that the polygons are facing, and now you can more or less scale that flat. It should, in theory, give you a pretty flush result. And let me try to do soften harden edge. It's still kind of displaying weirdly. So my final fix would be this. It looks like, why have vertices hang out here? When if I switch over to target weld, I can actually target weld this vert over here. Oops, sorry, this vert over here. That is so weird. What is it doing? There, that vert over there. So I'm going to start with this sort of top vert and left click and drag it over to the correct vertice there. So this is a much cleaner way, right, to arrange your kind of polygon layout, in this case, or vertex layout. And it should avoid any weird shading issue as well, right? Okay, so those are, a couple issues that can pop up. Sometimes if I go through all this, if there's still an issue, the next best thing is to go File, Export Selection as an OBJ, and then import it back in. That can actually clean your file magically sometimes. Or if you file, export, or go Z to ZBrush, or send it to another 3D software like Blender or 3D Max or whatever, and bring it back in. Again, it goes through a process where sometimes the bugs that might be popping up in that model are cleaned out through the importing and exporting process. Anyways, I think at this point, this should be okay. Let me check the channel box. Again, I'll delete history, and then I'll try to just go to do an automatic unwrap. And it looks like it's done. It did not crash, right? So if I assign, so it's not always the software's fault. Sometimes it's your fault. Not always a comforting thing to hear, but it's not me, it's you. It's not you, it's me. Okay, so if I just reset this, I'll throw the checker back on. Again, I like a light gray checker. And set this to 30 by 30. Again, automatic is just a quick way to get it done, but it looks pretty decent, right? Now, if you really wanted to get into doing more specific UVs, I would take parts like this, go to UV cylindrical. I mentioned to the other class or the other group today that this is one of the weird things about this tool. If you go to UV cylindrical and you want to do a cylindrical unwrap, there's no option to align it to X, Y, or Z. You actually have to go into the attribute editor for the cylindrical unwrap, and if you need to orient it differently, in this case it's oriented fine, but if I needed to orient it to the side, right, you'd have to kind of rotate it in the attribute editor through here. So I'm going to reset that, but yeah, there may be cases where you need to split that some other way.